Welcome everybody to another episode of Ganbei. I'm your host, Art Dicker, and today we have kind of more of like a panel discussion. It's our first roundtable of the show, and so I want to introduce three fantastic guests. The topic of the day is Huawei and the most recent announcement by the Department of Commerce restricting technology sales and licenses to Huawei. It's all in the news, so it's a hot topic to talk about. Our first guest is Nalin Balin. He is head of global sales at Reality AI. He previously worked at Cadence and other companies in the semiconductor industry. Nico Bahmanyar is a senior consultant on data privacy at Leaf, which is a law firm here in China, based in Beijing, is Nico. Nathaniel Rushforth, Nate, is a cybersecurity and data compliance specialist at Dawo law firm here in Shanghai, like myself. Welcome, guys. As I understand, the latest rule forbids Huawei from using foreign-made chips, any US software or technology, and it's defined with a word we've come across recently in the WeChat ban, any transaction, which of course is very broad. So any transaction where a party on the entity list was involved. So that's quite broad. Previously, there was a rule that came out in May, which had prevented chip manufacturers, what we call fabs, such as TSMC in Taiwan, from building Huawei based on Huawei's own in-house designs from its design company, HiSilicon. Now, Huawei, in the interim, was looking at an alternative supplier, Taiwan's MediaTek, instead, and it had a stock of TSMC chips that it was going to make it through September. And so now with this new rule, it seems clear that the Kirin line of chips in its handsets is going to be discontinued. And basically, Huawei had been planning to buy sort of standardized commercially available chips, not the custom chips that made their processor speeds so fast in their handsets. But now under the new rule, HiSilicon and Huawei will not be able to work with design software companies like Cadence and Synopsys. And so there's quite a few bottlenecks, and basically, unless some of these companies can get a license, as they did previously under the May rule, it's looking like there's going to be a hard ban on Huawei, including some of the Huawei's affiliates now in Europe and other places have also been put on the list. So this looks like pretty much an absolute ban, again, absent licenses that could be made available, could be applied for the Department of Commerce, exemptions to this rule. So that's the rule. We're going to get into the analysis of it in a bit, but first, Nico has put together for us kind of a timeline to give us the background of what got us to this point with Huawei. So Nico, I'll hand it over to you.
So yeah, there have been a lot of talks about Huawei over the years, and honestly, it's a little bit overwhelming. So if you're catching up on the saga at the moment, you might want kind of a reminder what happened in the last season or the 3 or 4 previous seasons, essentially, of this saga. It actually started in 2012. Back in October 2012, there was already some concern from U.S. Congress regarding Huawei and ZTE, actually, regarding the security threats on the U.S. So it was really the first flare on the U.S. side regarding Huawei. A few years later, Australia, 2018 in August, excluded Huawei and ZTE from the construction of their 5G network, which was very, very soon followed by New Zealand in November. There was this big case then in December 2018 about the CFO from Huawei being arrested in Canada, in Vancouver, and that was based on fraud charge from the US regarding breaking US sanction on Iran. So it was already looking like there was a lot of tension from the US on Huawei, but still not really knowing where it was going. It was very clear a few days after when the House of Representatives in the US passed a bill barring government from buying Huawei gear. So no equipment for any governmental agency. So that was the first big ban step in the US. The other country joining Australia and New Zealand about excluding Huawei equipment from the communication system was the UK with British Telecom. Again, December in 2019. So you see the ban on the 5G network is slowly expanding. Then about a year later, in 2020, there was a first block from the Pentagon regarding US companies selling equipment to Huawei. But there was a very direct block, not the one that we see today. So it was the very direct sanction from the US against Huawei. The position on the EU side was a little bit different, and then it was I almost want to say very traditional of the EU to essentially allow Huawei equipment on 5G network. However, the EU included a warning to limit the access of any unsecure equipment on their core network. And there will be, we'll go maybe a little bit later about the difference between core network and edge network with Nalin, because it makes a big difference between 4G and 5G. In February 2020, the US reported that Huawei actually has a backdoor access to mobile networks globally. So it was a confirmation of the threats that we had back in 2012. We also had the confirmation in March 2020 that Huawei had a direct role in shipping products to Iran. So that was coming back to the CFO case arrested in Canada back in December 2018. Finally, Canada banned Huawei from the 5G network in June this year, and UK confirmed its ban in July. So you see Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. You have all Five Eyes country banning and leading the ban on Huawei's equipment on 5G network. And finally, in August, India follows the ban on Huawei and ZTE equipment on the 5G network. And now we have this latest development in August regarding access to American chips and indirectly American technology. So there is a lot going on, and from an audience perspective, it's a little bit difficult to see everything going on, because you have the 5G network on one side, and you have the consumer business, the smartphone aspect. So it can be a little bit confusing. And to that extent, because I'm absolutely not an engineer, I know very little about networking technology, and at first I was a little bit confused. Why so much talk about 5G? Why is it so important? Why not 4G? Why is now becoming such an issue regarding 5G? And what is this core and edge difference? So maybe Nalin can jump in and explain us, why is the 5G changing the game, and why is Huawei suddenly becoming under more scrutiny just because we have this new 5G network technology?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, so maybe we can start with what does the core mean and what does the edge mean, right, in a sense. So if you think about the edge, it's essentially what you can think of a network structure and the last mile of a network structure. And the edge is basically things around that last mile. On the one side of the last mile, you have consumers like us and the client devices. On the other side of that last mile, you have service provider infrastructure like yours, base stations, network, cell phone towers, and so on and so forth. So that sort of constitutes the traditional network edge in a sense. The core is essentially your central hub, right, where all the data gets processed. It has your router equipment, compute, switches, all the access information that comes from consumers is sent to the core and processed there. So typically in a typical network infrastructure, right? And so 4G is still very traditional in that sense, or for the most part has been traditional in that sense that you have that data processing done primarily at that core. And sort of the edge is dumbed down, or there's not a lot of data processing happening there in a sense, right? And with 5G, that's changing. And why is that changing? Because there's a lot more data that needs to be processed. It's a very high bandwidth requirement. And it also requires extremely small latency, right? So things have to move very fast and quick across the network. And so that changes the entire network architecture for 5G. Now, instead of having all the compute and data processing being done at the core, you're actually now having to distribute it. So that line or that continuum from the core to the edge is kind of getting blurred. There is no core, there is no edge in a sense. It's distributed across that entire continuum, right? So processing can happen in different parts of the edge. It could be right at the client device. It could be on the other side of the client device at the service provider edge, or it could be in different parts of the network. What that means is now in 4G, you could just have the core protected and not worry about untrusted vendors at the edge. Now that you're distributing the processing all across the network, you have multiple points that need to be protected, and that becomes very difficult in the scenario. So there are multiple points of vulnerability when it comes to looking at intercepting data and processing the data, basically, because of the way data is being distributed across the net. So that's sort of what's changed. Now it becomes very difficult to protect that network across that entire continuum, as opposed to just saying, okay, I'll just protect the core. I'm not too worried about what happens at the edge. With 5G, that's changed. And that's changed because of the latency required and the bandwidth required to process all this data. You can't do it just at the core end, right? So that's the fundamental change. Now, why does that matter? What are the risks associated with that, for example? Well, of course, you have the typical things that would come to mind is personal customer data, right? Personal information, customer information data. But there are other aspects to this. There's also corporate data, industrial data. Think about an industrial sort of IoT setting where you have a 5G network that talks to a gateway at the factory that's looking at machines communicating to that gateway. There's a lot of industrial data there, right? So there's IP issues that come into play there, espionage issues. And one step beyond that, so I used to say 5G is always, or for a while, 5G was a solution actually looking for a problem, right? In a sense, you could do what you wanted with 4G. Why are we talking about 5G? And I guess that's slowly changing, right? We've talked about sort of industrial data, consumer data, but the next step beyond that, and that's really critical, is infrastructure services. A lot of next generation infrastructure services are going to be running on 5G networks. Think about your smart electricity grids. Think about your connected vehicles and autonomous cars that are connected. You will already have connected vehicles that are being hacked today, like Tesla, for example, right? So that is actually getting very scary because all these infrastructure services now running on 5G, on a 5G network, and there's vulnerabilities across pretty much anywhere in that network, that could become really dangerous. And that's what's sort of scaring, I guess, the US in general and other governments as well, right? In terms of why that matters in terms of the vulnerability.
And this is a follow question, and I'm going to bring you guys in as well on this one because it's more about data privacy. This what's going on here in this access, it's not something that you can just write a law about to protect against. It's all happening at a granular microscope, or not a micro, but a level of access which is either hard to detect or undetectable, or no protocol that you could come up with could probably deal with every contingency. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So from a data privacy perspective, guys, this just presents for everyone in the value chain, everyone that's using this equipment for trying to protect their data, not just from the technical side, but also from a legal risk and a liability side as well.
Well, the main issue that I'm seeing from a data privacy is that there is a lot of personal information that is stored on a smartphone locally speaking. So for example, I have my iPhone, I'm using Face ID or my fingerprint. This is stored on the device, and I know this for sure because the way Apple built the phone. So with the Huawei, the carrying chips, there is now a risk of not knowing where this information, those biometrics are going. And so you have a lack of transparency. And when you read all the documentation from Apple and the way they build their phone from a hardware perspective, you cannot know as a user, if you dig a little bit into it, you can understand how the phone process the data to unlock services or apps, and how it communicates those personal information or not back to a server. The thing we don't know with Huawei is how much of a backdoor there is from another entity, and we don't know again who has access to this backdoor to those personal information. The issue is that we're using way too much biometrics on our phone, and simply because it's convenient, I don't want to type my password on my phone. I'm just going to unlock it with my face. I can change a password. I cannot change my face. I cannot change my fingerprint. So once it's hacked, it's gone. And this means that my identity can be stolen or can be used for other purposes. So there is a strong lack of transparency. The EU has always pushed transparency as a core data privacy principle. When you look at privacy by design, for example, this is something that should be embedded in the system, whether it's software or hardware. And the issue that we have with Huawei is essentially there is a black box now in everybody's pocket, and we don't know what's happening. So this is the main issue.
But the remedy, sorry, Nate, I'll just a quick jump in. The remedy, though, is, I guess I'm trying to come up with the idea that that a legal remedy, or coming up with let's say a revised framework, a data privacy framework, or some kind of audit of equipment or whatever, is probably you're always going to be chasing something that's too difficult to find. In other words. You can come up with the most complicated framework in the world on what kind of access you need to that black box, but that box is just a certain part of that box is always going to be black, no matter how you try and come up with a policy framework around that.
That's correct, and this is why the general principle is accountability. Is simply you need to evidence and demonstrate your level of compliance. It's not up to the regulator to come and be able to audit and to inspect your hardware. No. It's absolutely too complicated for an outsider or third party to do this. It's up to the manufacturer or the service operator to demonstrate the level of compliance. And so essentially the burden of proof is put on the provider. So it is possible. It just requires some goodwill from the manufacturer or the service provider to say, look, this is the kind of data that we're collecting. This is how we're using it, and we can actually prove it. So it is possible. It just requires a goodwill and initiative from the manufacturer or the provider.
Yeah, and so just to add on to that, Nico was talking about the sort of black box idea, right? And I think part of the issue here also is that, especially with the Kirin chips, the level of sophistication of what they're able to do just on chip can be problematic, right? And as Nico mentioned, the type of data that we're all carrying around in our pocket, if it's exposed, could also be, it's problematic. And we're operating in a geopolitical environment right now where there isn't that level of goodwill, right? And so what we see is, both sides of this, this sort of not conflict, but, sort of competition. We see both sides coming up with pretty extreme ideas of solutions, one of which is obviously the latest order on Huawei. And then also, in China, the new rules that came into effect in June, right? And I think Nico can talk about those as well, but these sort of broadly deal with the types of hardware that are going to be allowed onto Chinese networks as well, and critical infrastructure. So we've got both sides sort of struggling with these the same issues, and there's not a level of goodwill to where the manufacturers, like Nico suggested, could just say, here, we're not doing what you think we're doing. It's not going to be believable by either side, I think.
So the U.S. policy response is basically not even going to try and. It's a sledgehammer approach, but that's maybe an approach that has been. We're not going to cast any value judgments on this. We're trying to avoid that as much as possible. But that's an approach that maybe just says we can't. What we just talked about, we can't get into this black box, and there's no good faith. And so the only solution then is this approach, and we've seen it a little bit with WeChat and TikTok cases as well, which is just, I'm just going to ban it. And obviously we could see some reciprocity there as well if we start to go down that road.